Yeah, I think the purpose behind it is that you set out a time to come together and get on the same page.
Yeah.
That you're looking at it as this is our time to communicate.
You know, it's about time. No, this podcast. This podcast is about time.
Oh.
See, my goal in this podcast is to see how many puns that I can make.
Oh, no.
And so maybe our film guy can create a little box on the side with, the number of puns. He might not want to do that. That'd be a little time consuming.
Oh, dear.
Well, we're off to a rocky start here. But seriously, literally, this podcast is about time and how we manage our schedules. And this is an area that you have really had to work on, honey, because you created a lot of conflict in our marriage early on with this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, just me by myself in the corner.
It's amazing. It's amazing how one person can create so much conflict with another person.
Oh my God.
And that's been the story of marriage. Obviously, I'm being honest. I mean, facetious here. But we did have a lot of conflict in our marriage early on because we didn't manage schedules well. And this would lead to, we used to refer to them as train wrecks. Like your schedule would be here, my schedule would be here. We wouldn't communicate. There would be a train wreck, and then you would get mad at me, and I would get mad at you too.
Honestly, we did have a rocky beginning to our marriage. Our first year of marriage was the hardest. I think even after 24 years, we would still say the first year was the hardest, don't you think?
Yes, but I'm not sure we're supposed to admit that kind of thing on a podcast where we're trying to show people that we have it all together. So, no.
Well, you like to show that I don't have it all together. You like to point that out every podcast.
Well, what our counselor says is I project. I'm projecting. So, obviously we don't have it all together.
Yes.
And neither do you. Just want to point that out. We're all on equal ground here.
Okay. So our first year was the toughest. And even, the years preceding our second, third year of marriage were difficult. And one source of conflict that we picked up on was just how we didn't communicate well with each other, especially on just the very practical thing of getting our schedules in sync and communicating well about when we were going to be home, when we were going to do this and that. And so we would be going along kind of doing our own thing, of course, making assumptions about what the other person was going to do or what they were assuming. And so, the conversation goes, well, I thought you knew that this was going to happen, or, well, I expected you to do this or that. And those kind of conversations usually end in a train wreck, like what you described earlier. And so from the beginning of our marriage, so in those first few years, we learned we needed to do something to help with that. And so we started in a habit of meeting together once a week. And
which might sound odd, but we literally scheduled a meeting together.
Yeah.
Like husband and wife, let's schedule a meeting. Let's put it on the calendar.
Mm-hmm. Just like you would schedule meetings for work or to meet up with friends or whatever. Even though we were husband and wife living together, we did this weekly meeting. And it helped alleviate a lot of conflict for us. We noticed right away because we were able to come together and talk through things before it ended up in a train wreck. And so this is what we're talking about today. How can we, as parents who are running a home, how can we bring peace and harmony into our home Well, real practically, we learned early on that having a time weekly where we come together and talk through the things of life that's coming up. And then we also included in this meeting, not just calendar, but finances as well.
Okay, you're jumping way ahead. We'll get to the practical part of it.
Okay, so don't admit yet what we talked about.
Don't give away the secrets, because we want to keep the secrets for the end so that people will listen all the way through.
Okay, so is this an odd topic to bring up on a podcast? Is this maybe someone might think, okay, well, what? This is kind of a weird thing maybe to bring up on a Christian parent podcast.
Do you think people would think this is weird?
I don't know.
How do we manage our schedules?
I don't know. I mean, no, I didn't think so. I'm being devil's advocate and thinking, okay, like, how do we make that connection? Like, is there anything Christian about viewing how we spend our time?
Yes. Okay. I see what you're getting at. That's key. And that is, I think what we want to help people do, and what we're trying to do, is to bring every single area of our lives into view through a Christian worldview. We want to see even something like managing schedules, time management, kids' schedules. We want to see all of it from a theological perspective, from a biblical perspective. And so pause here for a second. Have you ever, if you're listening, have you ever really thought, is there a biblical view of time? And I'm guessing the majority of us have not. We've not been trained that way. And so one of the things we'd love to just encourage you to do is, when you come to any issue, when you come to any challenge, the first question is, what's the Christian view of this? Or what's the biblical view of this? How does my theology, my study of God and his world and his word, how does it inform this particular issue? And so when it comes to time, we have scriptures. We have, in fact, we'll hit on a couple here. We're not going to do an exhaustive study of time here, but we actually want, this lays some groundwork for maybe what we want to do when it comes to talking about something like Advent and the Christian calendar, which that's a forthcoming podcast. But Psalm 90, verse 12 says this. It says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom." And so this idea of numbering our days, or keeping close watch over those days, understanding that we have a limited amount of time, right? Numbering our days. We have a finite amount of time here on this earth. And so what do we do? We're to live wisely. We're to live with wisdom. And so this goes to managing schedules. If you don't manage schedules well, if you don't live wisely when it comes to your schedules and time management, then you're not going to. There's all kinds of implications here. I mean, you'll have conflict in your family. You won't use the time wisely and in ways in which you and your family can serve God and his kingdom well while we have this short period of time. We may end up getting caught up in the busyness of scheduling, and then just starting to value what a secular culture around us values. Whether it's sports or school or academics or entertainment, whatever it might be. So there's a biblical view of time.
I think that principle of being wise with our time is how we've talked about technology on this podcast, and not letting technology control us, that we want to control it. And I think of that with schedule and time. We don't want to live unwisely and not be thoughtful about our time and our schedules, and let those things just kind of morph into things we're just slaves to. Yeah. But that we are actually intentionally planning things and stepping back and making sure that the overall picture of what we want to use our time for is being used for that thing or those things, and that we're just not a slave to our school schedule or our kids' sports schedule or our work schedule, even that we control that more than it controls us, which can sound strange because we do kind of feel a slave to our schedules, don't you think? I mean, you said to me a couple of weeks ago, how do we slow our lives down? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I guess we could move out in the middle of nowhere and just
You just insulted the people who live out in the middle of nowhere and they're listening. They don't appreciate their homes.
I wasn't done. Move out in the middle of nowhere and not use phones and computers anymore. Otherwise, I don't know how we would slow down, because life does move at such a quick pace. Mm-hmm. So anyways, just that idea of not letting the busyness control us so much.
Yeah. Okay. Ecclesiastes. I just wanted to reference a couple more scriptures. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and really kind of verses 1 through maybe the whole chapter. But the writer of Ecclesiastes says this: there is an appointed time for everything. And there's a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up. And of course, you just get the rest of these contrasts. And then it goes on to say, what profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. And so thinking about what occupies our time, what are the different tasks, and what are the tasks that are given by God? Mm-hmm. This is why it's so vital that we know what are God's commands, what are his instructions for those of us who are believers, particularly for the New Testament church. What should we be occupying our time with? And then it goes on to say in verse 11, he has made everything appropriate in its time. So he has also set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. And so you just have, again, the idea of time being addressed here. You have passages in the New Testament. Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 would be one where Paul talks about walking in wisdom towards outsiders, because the times are making the best use of time. Mm-hmm. So making the best use of time, meaning there's a wise way to use time. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16, that's where it talks about making the best use of your time because the days are evil. And so again, living in a fallen world, that means some of our theology in a fallen world, looking to use our time wisely for the cause of Christ, for the sake of goodness, to help bring redemption, to this world, to create good culture that points back to God. I mean, all kinds of things. So point is that the biblical text does address the issue of time. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I just encourage people to do is to maybe spend some time thinking about, okay, what is the biblical view of time? Because then what that should do is then motivate us to live wisely and to manage our schedules. Mm-hmm. And that's where now we can get really practical on how do you do this? Yeah. And there's all kinds of tools out there, but the thing that we referenced early on, you kind of gave it away, right? I wanted to build this podcast to this ultimate climactic moment
of a weekly meeting.
We're gonna have to work on our form a little bit. Yeah. So here's the big news, everyone. Here is the tool that has changed Erin's life. No, seriously, this seems so simple and so basic. Although I think when we've talked to some couples about this and we've mentioned this, it has been, received with like a lot of excitement, because I think couples who have lived, have had some conflict, who've struggled through this,
like we did,
kind of hear this and it's like, oh my gosh, that could really work. Because we got to be intentional on communication.
Yeah.
So the thing that we started doing was we started meeting every week. We put it on the calendar. And what we tried to do at that stage of life was have the same time every week and let it become a habit. And that was good at that time. I think the challenge with that can be, it's the standing meeting that over time you could just kind of let go. You miss one or two of them and it's just on the calendar and then you don't do it. Sound familiar?
No, I think actually, especially if you want to start off a habit, having it at the same time can be helpful. So like
I'm not saying
Sunday nights or something, like every Sunday night you just plan, you get kids to bed and that's kind of your meeting time or whatever.
Yes. I think the habit's good. What I'm just saying is be careful that it doesn't become one of those things you put on your calendar. And because it's kind of that every week thing, you eventually can say, oh, well, we could skip this week or we could skip this week, because then that'll snowball and you'll lose the habit. So that's why we would say every week at this time between such and such, and we would typically, we would do like 2 hours. I think we blocked 2 hours of time. Didn't always take 2 hours, but there were plenty of times when it would.
Especially if
I know
got into a fight, then it really would take 2 hours.
Yeah. Now that might seem like a long time. I can imagine someone's listening going 2 hours for a weekly meeting. So hear us out. Again, they don't all take 2 hours, but typically the first of the month when we're doing most of our bills, because we would incorporate finances in it, that would be a longer meeting. But then sometimes once you get into this rhythm, then we can do it in half an hour sometimes. So it fluctuates. We just wanted to protect that time, so we had enough time to do what we needed to do.
Yeah, I think the purpose behind it is that you set out a time to come together and get on the same page.
Yeah.
That you're looking at it as this is our time to communicate. So we would actually, I know in my mind, I would think, okay, this is an issue that I want to talk to Brett about. And so, okay, I know we're going to meet, I know we're going to sit down on Sunday night. So this is when we'll talk about it. And so you can, of course, use that time for other things too that come up, but schedule's almost always wrapped up into that, which is why. So if you're married, this is just a really helpful way to work together, I think, in the way that we're supposed to work together.
What about the person who's not married?
Yeah, so I think even the single parent, dealing with maybe the other parent, there's a divorce, so you have two parents or whatever that aren't living together. I think, again, the principle of it is to have a time where you're communicating. So I think you can even
communicate to yourself, talk to yourself.
No, I think you can't. You're still coordinating schedules just like those of us who are married are doing. So who do you have to communicate to help you coordinate your schedule? So if, like in my case, my parents helped a ton when I was a single mom, and I had other people too, but just that you would have a regular time where you're communicating things that are coming up. And it's really seen as a way to communicate to help avoid conflict of expectations or things not being communicated in the future. And I think too, single parents too, part of what I do with the morning time with our kids is weekly, we're talking about calendar too. Okay, what do we have going on today? And then even, okay, what do we have this week, you guys? So even having a meeting as a family, whether you're married or not, having a weekly meeting where you're talking about the things of life that are coming up, and it gives you space to talk about it before you're 30 minutes away from leaving and someone's surprised that you're leaving and now you're in a bunch of conflict.
Yeah. Well,
sort of thing.
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking, is that if you are a single parent, you don't have a spouse, and you're doing this on your own, this is still can be a very helpful tool, because they're your kids. Bringing your kids into this, I think, has some benefits. And our kids given us a hard time when we haven't communicated, an event to them. Or when we have communicated an event to them and they just didn't listen well. That's the other side of the coin. But yeah, even if you are a single parent, I think this is relevant.
Yeah, because you're carving out time to reflect on your schedule. And so if you're doing this completely by yourself, you still need that kind of check-in where you're stepping back, because that's what we do. We'd step back and we'd look at the whole week that's coming up. Or we'd look at the whole month coming up and say, okay, what do we have coming up? How do we navigate? Is this too much? Is that too much? So even as a single parent, I think it's wise to do that and think about your time and how it's being spent.
Yeah, there's kind of two aspects to it. There's the reflecting back on things and then a planning ahead.
Yeah.
Past and present. So what we would do in our weekly meeting is the two things that we would go through together, all the time was finances and calendar. And those are obviously so central to any family, and they are a source of lots of conflict for families. So we'd set up our meeting, and typically what we do is bring over the bill basket and we go through the bills. And of course, it's parts of the month it takes a little bit longer, other parts not so long. Bills, yeah. But we would go through finances and then we would get to talk about things. So that was just one of the great benefits, is that it's just facilitating communication. And so we do bills together. And I know couples have different systems on this. We think this works best for us, was doing bills together versus one of us doing it and the other just, kind of being in the dark. Or one does it and just kind of informs the other. For us, we wanted to have, and I don't want to disparage the way other people do it, because sometimes it works for them, but we wanted a real partnership in this, that we both felt like we're partners.
Yeah.
And again, couples can have some different ways they do this, but however you do it, you want to be partners in this. You want to feel like we're on the same page, we're communicating, that we're both bearing the burden, I think, because we have seen couples who where one of the spouses takes on the brunt of the finances, and either they're overburdened by that by themselves, or they make decisions without consulting the other that have gotten them in trouble, those kind of things. And so just for us, this really helped in some of that one, becoming one as a couple.
Yeah, I think there's, of course, going to be one spouse a lot of times that is better at it and prefers to do it. That's not you.
That would be me.
That is not you. It's typically the husband, but in our marriage, it wasn't. I would sit and pay all the bills and add up everything and know what our balance was.
And I don't know how to do addition, so I hate math.
And sometimes you would be completely oblivious to where we were financially. And I know typically it can be the other way around. But I think so. If you have a spouse that
like me, is that what you're going to say?
No,
okay.
That if you have a spouse that's like a banker
or
someone who's really good at it, I don't think it's good for the other spouse to be completely oblivious to where the family is financially, or that it's just one person makes all the decisions, the other spouse gets an allowance and has no clue about other stuff.
You may have stepped on some people's toes.
I know, I might have, but I think two healthy adults should be aware of where your finances are. And that even is for, like in our case, you have always in our marriage worked, and I've been either in school or staying home with the kids. And so just because you were bringing in the money didn't mean that that it wasn't mine also, and that we weren't, working together in that. So, and yes, of course, finances is a stressful thing. It can be. And so
this is a tool for oneness.
Yes.
For us.
Yes.
It's definitely been a tool for oneness. Yeah. And so that's why we always included finances in there. And then the second thing we do is calendar. And maybe you want to walk us through how have we done calendar? I mean, it's been pretty consistent.
Well, yeah, I think, when we started it, we would do it on like a Sunday night and just look at the week ahead. And we take it one day at a time. Okay, Monday, what do we have on Monday? And then just go through each day. And of course, when your kids are little, you don't have so much going on with their activities, but especially as they get older. And again, you're working and I'm staying home with the kids. So of course I'm doing more of the kids stuff, but you still should be aware of what's going on in your family. And
I'm vaguely aware of these little people who live in my house.
And we're supposed to share in the responsibility of raising our children. So
Absolutely.
Even if that means I'm doing the majority of the grocery shopping and taking kids to buy school clothes and all of these things, when we would sit down and do calendar, I would feel much more like we were in a partnership and not so much alone, even if I was doing a lot of the running around of the kids. Yeah. And it helps for me to bring you in the decision making of what the kids, especially as they got older, what they were involved in.
Yeah. And I think it also helps the one who's at work doesn't get to see all that's happening at home during the day and can easily take it for granted how the hard work that's required to really run a home. Because I would say, and I've said this to you and the kids, like without you, we'd be in a lot of trouble, like in terms of the management of our home, which is so vital, because that when you manage the home well, it brings peace and harmony and it frees you up from some conflict and that kind of thing. So that's such a vital role, but it would give the spouse who's at work, maybe at an office somewhere, a little more insight into how things go at home. In fact, I've talked to some husbands who have been home since the lockdown, right? The pandemic lockdown, and now are continuing to work from home, but they've talked about how it's given them greater insight into what their wives were doing at home, how difficult it can be, and the need for breaks. That was one of the huge things that we would make sure we scheduled in every week for you, because I knew how taxing it was to be at home and to be with the kids all day long. And so you needed breaks. Anyone would need breaks. And we would make sure that we would schedule those breaks. And in particular, when I was going to Talbot, doing my degree in seminary, my master's degree in philosophy there was a group called Talbot Wives that you plugged into, which is this really rich community. And so we would block out typically from like 3:00 until 11. Now, you didn't always leave at 3, but I wanted to give you a nice big break every Tuesday. And so you take off and you go have dinner with a friend and then go to the group that started at 7 and you'd go till 9, but then you'd hang out and talk and fellowship. And, you wouldn't get home sometimes till 10 or 11. But we were able to block that out. And I knew, okay, Tuesday night's my night. I'm cooking dinner. I'm doing stuff with the kids. And it gave you that kind of break and that kind of refreshment that you needed every week, because your task is so demanding.
Well, those breaks were so needed, especially when our kids were all little and I'm doing diapers and all kinds of stuff. But that's the good of sitting down and looking at the week and seeing, or like even looking at a month and seeing if we're not taking times of rest, if we're not getting breaks, if we're not spending time doing some of these things, then weeks and weeks can go by without that. And what we noticed is I was getting so worn out and needing,
especially when our son Micah came along. He was just a beast. And so we really had to ramp it up.
Happens to be our cameraman.
Oh yeah, he's
so
behind
you're
the camera.
Throwing him under the bus.
He's recording right now, and he can't say a thing because he can't intervene here.
So, anyways, but that's And that's one story of why sitting down and doing it together helps us to come together and to remind each other, hey, we're for each other. We're supposed to do this as a team. And so doing this as a team requires giving each other time to do things like this, to get a break, to have a good perspective on what most of our time is filled up doing.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, and just thinking about that too, it helped then facilitate ways that I could serve you and ways that you can serve me. And so I saw that as a way to love my wife as Christ loved the church, right? To sacrifice that night, which in one sense, there's sacrifice, right? You're taking on additional work. I have a full work day and then come home early. And then Tuesdays, I've got the kids all evening and night, and I know that having perspective, it helped me to appreciate more what you do every day like that. But it was a way that I could serve you. Mm-hmm. And so we're able to be intentional about that. And then it ended up becoming a very rich time for me and the kids. And so the kids really look forward to those Tuesday nights. We did some fun things. We did a thing called Readers Theater that we would, read a novel, but kind of do some special stuff and make it a fun time. Or I would take the kids out for a special meal or something like that. Or we'd find a place that did like Tuesday nights, kids eat free kind of thing. We did that a lot when we were when the poor youth pastor. But anyway, I'm just thinking about just all the benefits there are to this. And we've already mentioned some, but this really helped relieve some conflict. We didn't have as many train wrecks. Yeah. We wouldn't have the scheduling conflicts. We wouldn't get to a point where one of us is just worn down and then things explode. We're able to kind of manage that. I mean, we were able to look at my travel schedule. I've been speaking now for the last 20 years, and we were able to look and say, hey, Brett, you're on the road for 4 days here. You're home for 2 days. Then you're going on a trip for 3 days. Okay, I'm going to be exhausted. You would tell me I'm going to be exhausted at the end of that. Can you take these 2 or 3 days off afterwards? And I would say absolutely, because I see that as a way to kind of, compensate for all that time that I might be away traveling. And we would build in breaks during that time. I would be home. I'd unplug from work and so that when I came back, I wouldn't just jump back into work, because that's the temptation as a guy, who has these, propensities to want to build and create and keep moving forward. And I would need those break times. And so, you can just see all the potential conflicts that you can avoid by doing this, by managing schedules together. Yeah,
it helps in communication and it helps in looking at, like, we would look at the calendar and say, okay, we haven't done a date night for a couple weeks. And so we haven't really connected. We've been busy. So it's been a couple weeks. We should do a date night this week, say at our weekly meeting. And then we would find the time in that week that we could do a date night. Otherwise, you just go week by week by week and you're not communicating. And I'm feeling like, well, why aren't we doing a date? And, all these assumptions can start to come in if you don't sit down and talk about, I would really love if we could do a date night this week, or I would really love to do a girls' night with my friends. Can we plan a time to do it either this week or next week, and get it on the calendar and plan?
And another thing that we would plan are getaways. So we would look at, I think probably when we were first married and didn't have a whole lot of money, it was like maybe one a year or something, but we get it on the calendar. And as we were able to even, adding to that, even going kind of twice a year. No, I think we eventually tried to go quarterly, like planning a getaway quarterly, an overnight getaway. But that doesn't happen unless you plan.
Yeah. Well, also when we sit down, we would plan time to be intentional with our kids too.
Yeah.
And the more kids you have, the harder this can be to have alone time. But we would say, okay, this kid is, sometimes we would say that, okay, this kid's struggling, where it seems like they're going through a hard time. One of us should take them out this week for sure and do something to connect with them. Again, if you're not sitting down, it's harder to find time to do it. And it's less likely that it will happen. Because we've done this before where it's like, oh, we should do that. And then it doesn't happen because we don't actually sit down and plan to do it. So important things like spending time with kids on their own will happen more likely if you actually plan it. Yeah. And communicating together, because you have to do this together or it brings about just this potential for conflict.
Yeah. And by planning, you both buy into it. You both have ownership of it. So if we both together say, hey, on Thursday morning, I'm going to take Jonah out for breakfast and spend some time with him, and you agree to that, it's more helpful, or I guess it gets us on the same page versus I'm thinking Thursday morning shows up and I just say, hey, I'm going to take Jonah out for breakfast right now. I'm going to spend some time with him. And maybe you've had a horrible night that night and you didn't sleep well, or just it's a busy day. Mm-hmm. And so that, you're like, well, okay, but I need to do this with Jonah. And now it's become a stressful thing, which it should be a good thing. Yeah. So you avoid some of that, and you both have ownership in this. Mm-hmm. And then now when you look at the calendar, it's not pointing the fingers at each other. It's not that conflict. It's saying, okay, we made this decision together.
Yes. You could see how, the conflict of the husband calling, oh, hey, I'm going to go out with guys after work tonight. Is that fine? You could think of all kinds of things that might just pop up. And if you haven't talked through schedule, if your expectations haven't been expressed to each other, and like that scenario where the wife or the husband is exhausted, they were looking forward to being at home and maybe spending time with you that night, and then your spouse calls and says, oh, can I go out with friends? Now, of course, some of that spontaneous stuff still comes up, but when you've sat down and looked at the week, you can either say, oh, yeah, that's fine, because the next night actually is your date night, or whatever. Or you can say, well, honey, remember we talked about being home tonight because remember the rest of the nights this week we're out doing stuff.
Well, it can even prevent that.
Yes.
Because if I see that there's something we've put on the calendar, I'm not going to ask, because then when I do ask, and we already have planned something on the calendar, then I put it on you to say no, and then you feel like you're the bad guy, and I put you in a difficult spot, right? And so this actually prevents that, because I won't even ask, okay, we've planned to do family time on Thursday night. I'm not going to ask to go out and hang out with my buddies on Thursday night because I already know that's there. So it actually helps you with being spontaneous. Mm-hmm. Number one, it checks you. As a guy or a girl, to not be irresponsible with your time, to say, hey, I played all weekend with my buddies. All right, I'm not going to also ask to go out on Tuesday and Thursday and Friday again. And so it can hold you accountable. But then if we're on the same page, I think what's happened with us is that now we've gotten in a rhythm. And you build trust over time, you build a partnership over time, and it actually allows you then to be more spontaneous, where I don't feel like if I say to you, hey, I want to, can I go surf on Tuesday morning? And I've already looked at the calendar, that you're going to be like, oh no, like you, like, yeah, go for it. Mm-hmm. Or if you ask me, hey, can I go out to dinner with my friend? Like, yeah. And it almost, I guess, gives more freedom. Yeah. That's where self-control and responsibility and maturity and all that does actually lead to more freedom.
Yes. which sounds weird to say, but I think as adults, we do actually know if we're being intentional doesn't necessarily follow that you're more rigid or something, or that you can't be spontaneous, but it helps you to be intentional in having space in your schedule so that you can do things that come up, or right away when things come up, you can't do it. And your expectations are, I think so much conflict comes back to expectations. And so this communication just helps with all of that.
Yeah. And you get to manage kids' schedules. This is
Yes.
where we put on the calendar, hey, kids have sports. Jonah's got football practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Okay, who's going to take him?
Mm-hmm.
Am I just expecting my spouse to do that? Are we going to share in that? How does it look on our schedule? So this is where you're able to really help manage the family calendar, and to also look and say, man, we are way too busy. We are out every night of the week, and we're running here and running there, and the pace of life is just too much. And so this then allows us for intentional time, to be intentional about rest, mm-hmm. and to make sure that every week we have a Sabbath. This is our day of rest, and whatever, it just, you block that out. We have to block that kind of stuff out on our calendar. Otherwise, you just get caught up in the mad, crazy pace of modern American life.
Yeah, I'm not sure if any of us were really honest, if we looked at our schedules and saw that we were gone every night of the week for weeks and weeks on end, that would be good for our family, that would be good for our kids. So doing this calendar, this weekly calendar, can actually help prevent us in overcommitting.
Yeah.
Because if we already look at our schedules and we're gone Monday, Wednesday, Friday nights every week because of something, then when the new dance class comes up, or the next sporting event comes up, or the next church commitment comes up, you already know, because you've talked as a couple, we're kind of spread thin already.
Yeah.
And you could see why, and of course we've done this, where you can say yes to things and then really regret it because you didn't really look at just the calendar and say, would this be wise for us to do? And especially from a Christian worldview, where that we need rest, we need Sabbath, and to cultivate relationships, you need time together.
Yeah. And then I would say also, maybe one of the biggest benefits of this is that you can look at your calendar, your family's calendar, and ask, where are we doing ministry? Mm-hmm. How is our family fulfilling the Great Commission? How are we meeting needs in the neighborhood? What nights are we having people over for dinner and fellowshipping with them? How can we practice hospitality? These kinds of things. And if we look at the calendar together, we can go, oh my gosh, look, our calendar is so filled with activities for the kids or for us, mm-hmm. and we're just doing stuff for us, and we've kind of maybe gotten caught up in what the culture says we should be doing. But the New Testament gives us a different picture of what life should be like, and how we are to be ministry minded, how we should be, serving our community, going and making disciples, all of this stuff. And so working on our time management and our schedule together allows us as a family to be intentional about that, and prevents us from simply getting caught up in all some very good activities, but not allowing that to consume our life.
Yeah, which takes us back to where we kind of started with I'm making that correlation that I made of how we view technology, and also viewing our schedules, that we don't want to be a slave to our schedules. We want to be, as Christians, hospitable people. But if we are a slave to all these activities and aren't intentional about spending time together as husband and wife, if we aren't intentional about spending time with our kids, if we aren't intentional about leaving space in our calendar to be hospitable to those around us, if we allow our things to become just things we think God has given us just for us to enjoy and not to share, then that's what I mean by being a slave to the calendar. And we don't want to live that way. We want to live in a purposeful, intentional, wise way in how we manage our limited time that we get to have on earth.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Man, how time flies. I just had to get another pun in there before we wrap this up. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I hope what you hear is that this is a biblical way or in a wise way to kind of manage schedules, or managing schedules is consistent with a biblical view of time. That's what I mean to say. And that hopefully this is a real practical tool that you can implement in your home and in your families. And we've had friends who've done this, and it's made a big impact. And it certainly had a huge impact on us, and it's very practical. And it's not that time consuming. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.